This is William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. Welcome to the College of Complexes, being held at Barbeck's Restaurant at 8949 Garland Road, Dallas, Texas. Gently embracing the east side of White Rock Lake. When I entered, I was greeted like coming home to Grandma's house, warm and friendly. When visiting the Barbeck's Restaurant, tell them you want your reservations for the next College of Complex class.
Well, welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 204th meeting since we started in February of 2009. That means 204 different speakers we've had over a period of time. He's going to close the door. Very good. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require our speakers take a position on an issue, express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We really don't care what it is. And we give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we have a rule. We remind the interrupter that we only listen to one fool at a time. That's our rule. We live up to it. And then we have questions and answers, not speeches. And then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at this podium to respond to what the speaker said for or against. And then we give our speaker the last word. He gets a comment on the comment and close the meeting. That's how we do it. That's how it works every day, every time we're here. Anyway, before we introduce our speaker, though, are there any announcements? Now's the time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Well, come on up here. We're waiting for you patiently. You can make your announcements.
I did a two protest today. Yes. Okay.
Go ahead. You got the floor.
Okay, on Tuesday night at City Hall at 7:15, there's going to be an anonymous type protest. You may see a mask like I've got over there with the goatee, where people shed their identity so they don't get spied upon. And on Wednesday at the intersection of Preston and Mockingbird in Highland Park at 5 p.m. there will be a protest against tar sands and against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is this latest horrible free trade agreement that's far, far worse than NAFTA. So, excuse me. And on November 20th, which is a Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., there's a protest against the Walmart in Lancaster on I-35, East Frontage Road, northbound. There's a big Walmart there. That's the same Walmart where the June 1st protest took place. And that's what I remember off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but that'll do for now.
Any other announcements? Now's the time. Anybody have announcements? You got any? Jim, you got any announcements? No? No, he closed Walmart. All right. Oh, yeah. Well, you want to do that? Or all right. You did so well last week. I'll do it again.
Well, I'm certainly not the enforcer, but Tom asked me to come up and remind us all that we appreciate the hospitality of Barbeck's tonight, and they don't charge us a room rent fee to walk in the door, which we appreciate, and we want to be sure we do a good job of being good guests tonight. So if everybody would please spend some money at the table. We don't care if you dessert it or salad it or sandwich it or plate it or whatever, but buy some food and be generous with the server. You know, even if you don't buy very much to consume, she's taking good care of us and trying to serve all of us at once. And we were fortunate to have a person in place who had served us several times before we moved down to the Mecca. And she welcomed us back, and so it's sort of nice to feel welcomed, and so we want to just be sure that we do it both ways. So I know most of you know, and you don't need to hear me sermonize on that, but just a reminder, take good care of the folks here, and they're taking good care of us. So let's enjoy a good evening tonight, huh?
Any other announcements? That's it? All right. Well, next week we have speaker will be Calvin Blewett. He's going to talk about the causes and solutions of unemployment and solutions of foreign policy issues. It's on a sheet I handed out. You should have it. I don't want to put you to sleep reading all this. Anyway, it should be good. That'll be next week. And I wanted you to know that. Our speaker tonight is John Beesley. He's an English-born author, retired from a long career with Xerox, educated in London's Imperial College and the University of Dallas, MBA, DIC, PhD, will reflect on William Shakespeare, who held that the evil men do lives after them, the good is often turned with their bones, and conclude, so it is with Margaret Thatcher. He will show how she reversed the progressive trend that had occurred in the UK since 1945 and set the scene for today's malaise. John contends that her convictions were profoundly socially divisive and economically disastrous. We'll show how this relates to the economic political problems we face here in the U.S. today. So without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to John Beesley. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. It's like, well, thank you. Looking at your get-up, Tom, the black outfit, perhaps that's what I should have worn today, the black outfit. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about Margaret Thatcher. I've mentioned her several times, so it's only fair that I talk about her at some length. But before I really get into that, I thought I would give you a picture of the social environment in post-war Britain and also the economic environment, so you can actually get a picture of what went on. So generally speaking, after the war, the welfare state was introduced, the Beveridge Plan of 1942, and it was, of course, a Keynesian-based system, and all parties, including the Conservative Party, basically accepted the welfare state. It was quite widely popular, and of course, as I've said before, I was one of the initial beneficiaries of it. In terms of England, was then, and it still is now, a class-ridden society. Basically, in those days, you had the aristocrats, about 2% of the population. They were the lords and the very rich. You had the middle class, that was really the professional class, and that was about 20% of the population. And then you had the working class, about 75% of the population. The upper 5%, the richest members, were then and now a class apart. They are basically privately educated. And they go to private schools, and these schools have an entree into Oxford and Cambridge. So Oxford and Cambridge is primarily populated by the sons of the privileged. They generally use the private healthcare system, and having worked amongst them, many of them are terribly naive about the average person. They just don't live with them, they don't understand them. But some of them, especially the old people from the older families, have a noblesse oblige. That's to say, they actually do care about the country, and they do care about the people. generally speaking, the jumped up rich really don't. And I don't really see a lot of noblesse oblige in America. It probably has not had time to develop. So then we come to Margaret Hilda Roberts, as she was born. She really came from the lower echelon of the middle class. She wasn't from the hierarchy. She was born in Grantham in Lincolnshire. This is in the middle of the country. So she would have had a sort of a northern accent, which actually she had voice training to get rid of. So she adopted a more posh southern accent. She, sort of in the early 40s, she was quite clever. She won a scholarship to Oxford in chemistry. And after she married Dennis Thatcher in 1951, he paid for education, further education, to become a barrister, that's to say a top-flight lawyer, and she specialized in taxation. So that's really the social environment of England. Let's talk about the economic environment. Post-war England. There was of course, Britain fought the war for 6 years. America's 3.5 years. So Britain wound up the 1945 really financially strapped, broke. However, in 1944, of course, there was the Bretton Woods Agreement that I've spoken of before. The IMF was founded, but it was founded on a fixed exchange rate. Now, Keynes wanted a variable rate, but I won't go into that. So so Keynes didn't get what he wanted. It would have been better for both countries, but that was it. So, for 25 years after the war, Britain was in this straitjacket of fixed exchange rates. So they couldn't, and the value then was, of course, the dollar was $35 an ounce, and most other countries were tied to that. So the exchange rate after the war was $2.8 to the pound. So, but when you have this fixed exchange rate, you're really strapped. You can't really use monetary policies or fiscal policies. So what happened was that Britain had this fixed exchange rate, but needed to have a trade surplus. The reasons were threefold. Firstly, it had to support the sterling area. That was the trade area using the pound, English pound. And in the 50s, that was still supporting about 50% of the world's trade. And of course, this created good income for the City of London. City of London also still carried on investing overseas, so that took, that needed a trade balance. And lastly, the remnants, England still had the remnants of its empire, and so it had quite a few military bases overseas. That lasted up until the early 60s. So what happened was every time there was a boom, imports flowed in, so that affected the trade balance, which would have disturbed this fixed exchange rate. So to fix that, they had to initiate a recession. So every time the country got going, then they had to slam on the fiscal brakes and create a recession. So the entire 50s and 60s, it was boom, bust, boom, bust. So what the effect was really there was a lack of investment in the country. And that permeated really the 50s and into the 60s. So the result was there was very slow growth in the economy. Relative to the USA and other European countries. So what happens when you have a lack of investment, the economy becomes increasingly uncompetitive, and the living standards, of course, are hit as well. And of course, England has to trade to live. It can't support itself agriculturally. It has to import a certain amount of food. So then about 25% of the gross national product was actually exported. I mean, it's quite a high margin. So in 1967, the strain on the balance of payments was such there had to be a devaluation from $2.8 to the pound to 2.4. George Soros, who was educated at London School of Economics, made a fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars, because he knew this devaluation was coming and bet against it. So now we come to the 70s. That was the era of stagflation. That's to say, the economy stagnated, but you had high inflation. The main reason was energy. Remember, there was the Arab-Israeli War in 1973. The other thing that happened, which affected energy prices, was in America, the oil production peaked in 1971. So thereafter, America was an importer. In fact, the importation went up sixfold. So in 1973, up to that point, oil was about $3.50 a gallon. In 6 months, it trebled to about $10 a gallon. Later on in the 70s, you had the Iranian Revolution, and oil went up to $35 a gallon. And that completely, it slowed, that's what caused the stagflation. And, you know, that's what the various political parties had to contend with. So let's talk about, so that was the economic environment, really. It was a very tough economic environment. But the thing I want you to remember, the problem was underinvestment. That was a key feature of the economic environment in the 50s and 60s. And then we had stagflation in the 70s. So where does Margaret Thatcher appear in this scenario? Well, she, in 1959, she was elected Member of Parliament for the Conservative Party, it's not a right-wing party, to a safe seat in Finchley in North London. Well, North Finchley is about 3 miles down the road from where my house is now. The house is in Barnet, but Finchley is about 3 miles down the road. So I live in a pretty right-wing area, actually. Not my house, anyway. So it was a safe seat. Harold Macmillan was the Prime Minister, and he spotted this young talent and gave her some pretty important roles. And in 1970 to 74, she was Minister of Education. In the 70s, in the late 70s, that's when the Labour Party was in power, from 74 to 79, there was a period that they dubbed the winter of discontent, because this oil had gone up to $35 a barrel. There was high inflation. The Labour Party had persuaded the unions to freeze wages, which they lasted for about 5 years. But with this huge increase in oil prices, inflation went through the roof, and so the unions began to go on strike, and there was turmoil in the country. The country actually shut down for a bit. You had the 3-day week and so on. So amidst this turmoil, there was a general election, and Margaret Thatcher came in and she was elected Prime Minister because of this winter of discontent that happened. Thatcher was what's called a conviction politician, and she was influenced by the ideology of von Hayek and the economics of Milton Friedman. She thought she could cure UK problems by opposing the welfare state and everything about it, opposing Keynesian economics, deregulation, especially the financial system. She wanted to introduce much more flexible labour markets that meant destroying the power of the trade unions. And she decided that she would privatize most of the state assets that she could. As Harold Macmillan said, and he was the Conservative Prime Minister, she began selling off the family silver. Now, she was somewhat religious, so in her maiden speech, she harked back to a hymn. She said that with this full-blown laissez-faire system, this would restore hope, harmony, truth, and faith. So she set forth on a premiership which lasted for 11 years, from 1979 to 1990. So she embarked on this. So she used her guiding economic principle was, of course, Milton Friedman's monetarist theories. They're very much akin to the Tea Party today. And basically, it's called salvation through economic flagellation. It's you can liken it to a man that crosses the street and he was knocked over by a car and he's lying in the gutter bleeding and injured. So the Tea Party Good Samaritan comes along with his baseball bat. Says, get up, what are you doing? Lie there, show us your strength. And is amazed when the man expires. So what were her first steps in this, using this monetarist theory? Well, she reduced income tax, but at the same time, she reduced rather income tax, but increased purchase tax. So that put the prices up by about 6%. So this inflation-fighting monetarist wonder caused inflation to double in a year to peak at 22%. So my friend in black, you were up in Chicago where Milton, why on earth did you let this man run around on the loose? I mean, he should have been locked up.
Do you know what Margaret Thatcher did? She came to Chicago.
Yes.
Said to the Irish mayor, what was her name? Jane Burns, the Irish are pigs.
Well.
It was in the heavens. She is.
By the way, Milton Friedman came over to Britain and lectured on his wonderful system to the Parliament. But anyway, so she did that. So inflation got worse. In fact, I'll go into that in a minute. But anyway, to make matters worse, she raised interest rates by a total of 5% over a few years. So of course the pound rose in value. So that worsened the trade deficit. She also took away any capital controls of money flowing in and out of the country. And of course the problem therein is when you free up capital controls, how on earth can you control the money supply? I mean, it's a contradiction. But apparently, anyway, the sum of these measures meant that controlling the money supply and monetarism was totally impossible. Now, I went back and looked, because, in fact, when I read all this again, I burst out laughing. I said, how could you possibly believe this? I mean, in fact, did you believe this? Because it doesn't make any sense. So actually I went back to a book written by one of her cabinet ministers in the first few years called Ian Gilmore. And yes, they truly did believe that this monetary policy would restore the country. They actually did believe it. As laughable as I find it. Anyway, so much for the monetary measures she brought in. So let's turn to fiscal policies. Well, a mantra was cutting waste in government. So she kept cutting. Now, her plan was to actually have public spending a certain proportion of the economy. So, but as you cut the economy it decreases. So to maintain that proportion, you cut some more. And so you cut some, so she cut and cut for about 4 or 5 years. Of course, the economy imploded. And so this was touted at the time as a counter-Keynesian masterstroke. Well, I suppose you could call it that. Now, of course, as I say, in 79, because of the oil increases, you had pretty high unemployment. So for the next 7 years, unemployment continually rose. Unemployment to over 3.5 million, which because she, I'll get to that in a minute, but she actually decimated heavy industry up north. So unemployment was about 20% in those areas. So what saved her? Because she was in office for 11 years. Well, there were 2 factors that saved her. One was the Falklands War, where we rushed off because of, I think, a couple of thousand British people in the Falkland Islands, and they were attacked by the Argentinians. So we sent a gunboat down there to save a couple of thousand. I think the game plan was to save a couple of thousand British people and 50,000 sheep. I think that was the score. So she came back and she was heralded as the Churchillian heroine of the age, and that was that was pretty popular. The other thing that saved her was North Sea oil, because it came on stream in the early 80s, a completely unexpected bonus. And it was taxed at about 80%, so the revenue was quite large. It sort of held off the trade deficit for a time. But of course there was 3.5 million unemployed, so most of that money went to pay unemployment. And a lot of people were put on the sickness benefit because that disguises, because they weren't unemployed, they were on the sick benefit, so that disguised the actual level of unemployment. So about 25% of the whole manufacturing base was wiped out. The steel industry was gone, car manufacturing was gone, shipbuilding was gone, coal mining was gone, much of the chemistry industry was gone. And so 3 generations later, we still have, really that area up in the north of England is not really recovered to this day. Actually, it's Liverpool is in the Midlands. You're talking about up in Newcastle area and so on. But the Midlands as well, Midlands up to the north is gone. So the remnants of what's been left has been sold off to foreign owners. For example, my first job in England, I worked at English GEC. 2 geniuses, after Arnold Weinstock left, 2 geniuses from the City of London took it over. And so now it's sold off to Swedish Ericsson. I worked for ICL, that was the biggest computer company. Thatcher gleefully sold off to Fujitsu. So Bentley cars are owned by BMW, Rolls-Royce cars are owned by Volkswagen, Jaguar Land Rover is owned by Tata of India, and so it goes. So today, 50% of the gross national product is in foreign ownership. So my biggest beef against Thatcher was this chance she had with North Sea oil money to reinvest in the country. And as I said earlier on, Britain's problems, and I grew up, and I have a book by Andrew Schonfield I bought in 1959, which actually, that's the way I was 20 years old then. I first read about Britain's problems, and the problem was underinvestment. So we had this marvelous opportunity to reinvest in the country, and she squandered it. She squandered it. So that's my biggest beef against her. Biggest. But she did have 2 economic achievements. So at the height of the unemployment, 1987, inflation did come down to 3.4%. Her other great achievement was to totally disprove Friedman's monetarist theories. I mean, every part of it was disproved. So that has now totally disappeared under the waves. It's never spoken of again. So in terms of looking at how she compares to the Tea Party, which I think she does, she shares the view that cutting public expenditure during a recession would enable the free market forces to regenerate the economy. Well, of course, it does the reverse. So the current sequestration is in fact harming the economy. Let's hope it doesn't kill it. I mean, if it goes on and was repeated, and you never know what these clowns can do, it will kill the economy. So that was the economic effects, but let's talk about the social divide. Of course, during the 50s and 60s, we had Keynesian economics, and unemployment averaged 1.6%. That's just a few 100,000. So she managed to increase it maximum up to by a factor of 10. So as I said, the hardest hit areas were the heavy industry areas, and unemployment was 20% in those regions. But she believed in self-sufficiency. She announced one day, there is no such thing as society, only individuals and families. So as the unemployment rose, of course, she cut social benefits and public services. So the term scroungers began to be used. These people are just scrounging, and you hard-working people are just supporting these scroungers. The other phrase that was used by Norman Tebbit, who was get on your bike. You know, you need to get on your bike and find work. By the way, the Conservative Party has been in power in England today, and the same phrases and the same attitude is still being used. Scroungers and so on. In 1988, the economy sort of had a minor recovery, and she announced that everyone in the nation has benefited from the increased prosperity. Everyone. However, she was condemned by the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was the head of the Church of England.
Wow.
He produced a report showing that childhood poverty had increased to 26%. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that's to say the Treasury Minister, announced that we could not possibly afford a system that encouraged idleness and irresponsibility. Now, I always go back centuries, so let's do it right now. So in the 16th century, you all heard of Henry VIII, of course. Well, of course, they wouldn't let him, the Catholic Church wouldn't let him get married again, so he became a Protestant and sacked the total wealth of the church. So whereas the church had been responsible for helping the poor, after that point, the state was responsible. So you have the Elizabethan era poor laws introduced. Basically, Thatcher repudiated these poor laws. She said that this dependency culture is to be deplored because it distorts the free market, and it offended Victorian values of thrift and self-reliance. And of course, high unemployment was explained to be voluntary. So social cohesion began to break down. From the first year in office, basically all the way through, there were strikes, violence, and so on. So basically peaceful England became a battleground of strikers fighting the police. In fact, the police then, used very harsh tactics on beating up strikers and so on and so forth. So, and this occurred all the way through. Now, her idea of social fairness was really her final undoing. She, in real estate taxation, called the 1989 Community Charge, she felt that the billionaire living in a $100 million mansion in Mayfair in London should pay the same real estate tax as a poor widow living in a one-room council flat in the north. That was her idea of social fairness. This was the last straw. I mean, in fact, there was civil disobedience. I mean, en masse, because in fact the poor really couldn't, because the real estate for the poor taxes for the poor went up, for the very rich went down. So there was grand civil disobedience. They refused to pay it. There were huge riots. At the same time, the inflation was going up, unemployment was going up, the trade deficit was worsening. I mean, the situation was deteriorating. So the Conservative Party grandees kind of had enough. So there was a leadership election, and she lost. So in 1990, she left the scene. So the serious questions that I asked myself, looking at this wreckage, really, was she really a sociopath? I mean, was she driven by some kind of, because her father was a Methodist, and she was brought up in that, was she really driven by some idea of original sin, that people had to be punished? And perhaps the poor deserved to be punished more than everybody else. I mean, there was something about her that was not quite right. In my opinion, she suffered from a serious moral deficit. That's my view of her. She may have been very religious, but suffered a serious moral deficit, apart from anything else, of course. Anyway, because of her, the Conservative Party is branded as the nasty party. And so I think, coming back to America, I think people like Ted Cruz are very similar in attitude to Thatcher.
And Reagan?
Well, I don't know about Reagan. I mean, I think it was Gaga half the time, so you can't really say. So, getting back to Ted Cruz, I think two points need to be known about him. I think he's a dangerous economic ignoramus, and I think he too has a very serious moral deficit. And I think he should be attacked on both counts vigorously. Vigorously. I'm really fed up with these pseudo-fake religious people, who are masquerading as Christians. I'm just fed up with it. So my statement to them is, a mean callousness does not make you a Christian. So what were her financial policies? Let's go through some of those. So trade unions, she blamed trade unions, as they do here, as my physician does, for all the problems in the world. Right? So she dealt with them by closing down all the heavy industries. And of course they were sold off, right? So that really destroyed because they all became, the main unions were in the heavy industries and they became jobless, so they basically, just like here, lost power. Education. Well, she cut the budget by 20% over 5 years. So 3,000 academic positions were lost. And as I've said, she went to Oxford University. They would normally have given her an honorary degree. They refused to do so. The National Health Service, she really wanted to privatize it, and she created a plan for it. But really that was wildly unpopular and it would never get through. So she settled for creating what's called an internal market, where one hospital is in competition with another one, and so on. She also outsourced the fringe services such as cleaning and food service. So today, it's in the past, the matron, you know, the head nurse, carried a big stick, and she made sure the place was spotless clean. Well, now we have the cheapest labor possible by immigrants cleaning the place. So we've had MSRI breakouts, C. difficile breakouts. Housing. Well, because of the war, 1/3 of the housing stock was either totally destroyed, partially destroyed, or needed to be replaced. So a lot of social housing was built, council houses and apartments. So she decided these should be sold off because she wanted to lower the rates, of course. So this money went to lowering the rates, that's to say the real estate taxes, and she forbade them being replaced. So today you have because of the new the cheap Labour Party let in, I don't know, several million immigrants in the last 10, 15 years. So you have a tremendous housing problem. Rents are unaffordable for most people in London. The only cheap houses are up in the north of England, where, of course, there are no jobs. Privatization. Well, basically, the sale of as many state assets as you could get away with. But when you sell the water companies and the gas companies, electricity companies, they all become monopolies. And so a few people do very well out of it. And by the way, the Royal Mail was just sold off last week. The Royal Mail, and I think a hedge fund that owns the majority control nowadays. So in terms of where we are in England, the water company are owned by the Germans, the power company is owned by the French, the transportation system, railways, bus companies in London, owned by the Germans, and the airports are owned by the Spanish. Just last week it was announced that a consortium of French and Chinese would buy into and build the power stations. Now it turns out that all these French, German, and Spanish companies actually are state companies. So apparently, according to the mantra, state ownership is a good thing as long as it's not British state ownership. Financial services. In 1986 was the Big Bang. That's when services were completely deregulated. Now, just as a matter of some fun, that also meant that you had the introduction of electronic trading, totally computerized. So on the day all this began, October 1986, an hour later the whole thing crashed. So you had these traders bashing their computer screens saying, "Get this down." So that's sort of reminiscent of what can happen with computer systems. But what really happened, because basically there were absolutely no regulations, all the financial fraudsters went to England, and this led directly to the 2008 crash, because it was all orchestrated out of London. The other thing that happened was that the professional bodies that support the financial system, like the accounting system, the auditing system, the mortgage companies, legal system, and so on, all their ethical standards were degraded. And greed was good, so the whole ethic of, which I grew up in the City of London, my word is my bond, became, I'll cheat you if I can. And that's the prevailing ethic caused by these Thatcher policies. So what are the very important lessons for America? The first one is that anti-Keynesian economic policies always fail. Sometime I'll have to go over what Keynesian policies really are and how they work. Keynes is actually an intellectual tour de force, because everything he did is counterintuitive. It's a pretty difficult thing to grasp it. The other thing that, next thing is that Tea Party cuts will destroy the social fabric if they carried on far enough as they'd like to. Whereas in England, the citizens were unarmed. If a similar thing happened here, and they really did what they wanted to do, which to cut everything, citizens here are armed. And I think that really does give me pause for thought. Because it really was a riot in England. The social fabric just completely broke down. Thirdly, I think the lesson is the far-right agenda, to my mind, is morally deficient. But the most important thing for America to understand is the following: that underinvestment will always eat away at the economic engine, destroy it. And so there's always a loss of competitiveness and a lowering of the standard of living. Now, when you look at America, if this economy were a closed economy, that's to say there were no trade, then investment basically equals savings. But when you have foreign trade, the equation is this: investment equals savings minus the current account. So what is current account? Well, it's a trade deficit plus all the other money that flows out. So investment will always get hit by a negative trade balance. So about 2007, the current account deficit was about 7%. Now the investment runs around 20%. So investment was being reduced by about a third. Today's money, that's $1 trillion. So you're taking $1 trillion out of investment in the country. Okay? So that has very serious implications for the future of this country. And so this was paid for by, of course, government bond sales and asset sales. So if this goes on, one day Americans will wake up, just like in England, and find out that half of their country is foreign owned. So if you want this to carry on buying stuff at Walmart, etc. Okay, my final note, end note. Bit of history too. Lady Caroline Lamb said of her lover, Lord Byron, he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Many people said the same thing about Margaret Thatcher. I think it's a fairly fitting epitaph. Well, Margaret, Baroness Thatcher, I don't know where you've gone, but where have you gone? Rest in peace. One more note. And I'll hand out some flyers. There is, if you go onto the internet and you select YouTube, and in the line which says videos, you type "our friends in the North," you will see a 9-part, 1-hour series. That's to say, total of 9 hours, which follows the adventures, the lives of 4 young people in up north. Really based on, and all the incidents are in fact historically correct. And believe me, it's far better than this pile of saccharine called Downton Abbey. But it will actually give you the backdrop of everything I've been saying, because it follows their lives, as I say, from 64 to 1995. And anyway, it's well worth watching. It's for free, okay? You can get it right off the internet. So I'll hand out some, I've got 10 flyers here. I'm not making any money, but it's, if you're interested in what I've been saying, but I think the most, apart from the economic disaster that she caused, it's really the degradation of society that she caused. And really, I fought her on both counts, really. There was no need for it. But she knew she was right. So I'll hand these out. Pass me that.
You know, when I was doing the College of Complexes for the Facebook, and I looked up Margaret Thatcher songs on YouTube, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. My favorite was in Liverpool, in the soccer stadium, where everybody started screaming, "Go home, Margaret Thatcher, go."
Well, she, as you know, in a funeral, I mean, she was, well, in fact, the average working people actually hated her. I mean, there was a visceral hatred of her. As I say, I have 2 beefs, really. She wrecked the economy. That Britain has never got back, should have got back on its feet through North Sea oil, which she squandered. And she ripped up the social fabric and so on. Now, I don't know how worse you could be, really. My concern is the Tea Party, with the same mindset, would do exactly the same thing.
They are.
Exactly. And as I say, you should attack them on 2 grounds. And I haven't heard anybody, economically and morally. And I think the situation is serious, really, is serious. But fortunately, as I told my friend who was here from England, and I said to my wife when this budget fiasco was going to happen the other week, I said, don't worry, the money men are not going to let him crash the economy. So the money men visited GPO grandees and said, look, stop this clown or we'll stop you. Because they knew what wreckage it could do to the economy. So that's what happened. So I think Texas can go its own merry way with Ted Cruz and think he's marvelous. Well, you know, good luck, Texas. But I do fear for the country. I do fear for the country. But, you know, I have assets in England, we have assets in Finland, so we can always escape, but really, that's not the point. I've been here 45 years, so, you know, Americans are good people, but they've been misled and wrong-headed. So, questions?
How many times was Ms. Thatcher re-elected?
Twice.
So that would be 3 times she was elected the first time, and then re-elected twice. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay, so the people voted for her the first time and 2 times after that.
Correct. Yeah, the first time was because of this winter of discontent. The second time was really because of the Falklands War. The third time, actually, for reasons which are difficult to understand, people thought that the economy, well, actually, the economy was recovering for a short period. Just like nowadays in England today, with the nasty party still in power, the British economy, of course, like America, crashed in 2008. It's still, 5 or 6 years later, 3 or 4% below where it was in 4 or 5 years ago. So what will happen is that there will be, an upsurge, and they'll say, boy, look at the economy, it's recovering, our economic policy has worked. Well, that's what she did. There was an upsurge. See, you can always boost the economy by government spending, and that's what she did. So people have a short memory. The economy was going up, so she was re-elected. But it was very short-lived. I mean, when that boost was over, the economy tanked. And things went downhill so fast that it was amazing. And of course, this community charge, this poll tax, was really the last straw, because there were riots and so on. So that's what did her in, finally.
John?
Yes.
Yeah. As far as the parliamentary government there, is there a term for Prime Minister?
No, not for Prime Minister, no.
That's right. When you say re-elected, she just didn't have a vote of no confidence. Is this true, or?
Yes, that's correct. But so she was never ousted by a vote of no confidence. She was removed by her own party.
Yeah, what I'm saying, when you said 2 terms or 3 terms, is there actually a term?
Yes, there is a fixed parliamentary term for 5 years. Now, but the party in power can call an election anytime it wants. So, for example, the Wilson government in '64 got in with a small majority of about 40, which means that, it's difficult to maintain your majority. So after a year or so, it called another election, and its majority went up. So the terms, there is a maximum term, but there's basically no minimum term. So that's the way it works.
So a term can be called by the party?
Yes.
And at that time, if they think they're strong enough, they may want to get re-elected.
It is can also be called by, as you say, a vote of no confidence. I mean, basically speaking, if the party in power loses the vote in Parliament, they more or less have to go, because they can't really rule anymore. So they have to call an election.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still not totally clear on this. When they have an election, and there were 3 times that she was elected.
Yes.
This is a voting by the public?
Yes.
Do they have in England electronic vote counting machines?
Not to my knowledge, no. It was basically always a paper ballot. So it's usually over fairly quickly. It's about, lasts about 5 or 6 weeks. And by and large, I mean, I don't think, you don't have district gerrymandering very much. You don't, I don't think there's a lot of, election fraud goes on. So she won fair and square, no question. In fact, when she left office, there was another election, and her hand-picked successor, John Major, came in. But they made such a mess of it, really, because he went on privatizing, and the economy was still in the doldrums, and that's when the world's biggest charlatan, Tony Blair, came in. So, I have absolutely no faith in politicians, as you can tell. I mean, to me, they're unfit to govern anybody, but there you go. I'm sorry.
Were her major manipulations of things like the Falkland War and so forth right before election time?
No, the Falkland War was really not done for political purposes. It just happened, and when it was not like 9/11 when that happened. Then you know, the president stands there and says, we're going to hunt these guys down. So there's a natural pulling together of the population, and so that's what happened with her too. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, we missed the very beginning. What I remember, there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the Wilson and the Heath
when they were in power. Just people felt like it was just two individuals who were pretty much the same. Was that part of Thatcher's rise to power, that there was dissatisfaction with those two? And do you think that's a little bit of the Tea Party? They're feeling like the Republican Democrat Party are also, they're unsatisfied with both of them, and that maybe a radical change is needed.
Yes, I think, well, the Wilson problem was that he should have devalued about 4 years before he did. You know, because, as I say, when the economy is in this straitjacket, I mean, you just, you know, the economic problems, you have no flexibility. You can't, you know, to run an economy, you must be able to control the monetary system and the fiscal system. And as I have proposed before here, you should have a separate institution to do this, because they must be controlled together. You can't have the Treasury doing it on one hand and the Fed on the other hand. I mean, that's what, in fact, funny enough, that's what happened during the Reagan era. You had Paul Volcker at the Treasury, Paul Volcker at the Federal Reserve slamming on the brakes, and yet then you had the Reagan tax cut, actually, which was counter to that. So, you know, you have to run them together in a sort of a very careful way, but that takes some degree of skill, actually, to do that. So, which most politicians do not have. One day I'll explain how you can run an economy, but you know, Jim.
Yeah. You say, and I agree, that the far-right agenda is morally deficient. This is true both for Thatcher and both for Cruz and those who agree with them. The mystery, to my way of thinking, is why hasn't there been any person or force, either within or outside of the GOP, that has called them on the carpet about that and fixed it? I mean, why is this moral vacuum in leadership existing? Do you have any opinions on that?
I think there's a confusion between religiosity and moral values. In fact, I'm getting together Monday. I'm going to get together with Bill Baldwin, who writes the Helmsman series of books, and he edited my book called Sabotaging America. We're going to talk about two books. One is going to be Economic Democracy, where I really will justify why these things should be done economically. And I might have to go into mathematics, but it really, it's counterintuitive, and that's the problem. But the second book is going to be called Morals in America, dealing with just what you said. You know, my view is that America is a very religious country, but it is morally deficient.
I have a couple of quick questions. One, in England, in the United States, I feel like our right-wing people are lower class people that would benefit from more of the democratic principles. And they seem to be voting against, some of my friends that voting against their own best interest. Is that the way it was in England? Was everybody, you know, thought Thatcher was right or worked for the austerity, or is that different?
Yes. What happens is this. I mentioned it. It's branding people as scroungers. So here you are, a hard-working blue-collar guy, really earning your $7 an hour, and here are these people on welfare that are scroungers. And so this is their fundamental attack, that this divides the working people. And I was invited to give a talk at this, the Philosophers Club a few weeks back, and afterwards this guy said, oh, that's why all these people vote for these benefits. I mean, because they want the Democrats to get in so they can live off on the benefits, you see. Well, you know, I wouldn't like to be living on the benefits, especially at $7 an hour. There is always this divide, because if you keep on about these scroungers, and remember Reagan was the same. I mean, welfare queens driving to the Social Security offices in Cadillacs, kind of thing. Yes, it's a very persuasive message, especially when you're working hard and you're not making it. Now, but you see what happened in England, as I explained, because of this underinvestment in the 50s and 60s, the economy really wasn't growing, and it was getting worse. And so, I think Keynes was wrong to sign the Bretton Woods Agreement. I wouldn't have. He didn't have to, but he really wanted a multinational economic system in place. But I would have actually gone to the New York bankers and borrowed from them and said to hell with fixed exchange rates, because it really doesn't work. You have to be able to have monetary and fiscal flexibility, and that's what Britain didn't have.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yes.
About Cruz. Do you really think that he's trying to do something positive, or do you think he's just trying to destroy our country as we know it today? And do you think he has a fix for it? Because he didn't seem to have a fix for this last shutdown. It just seemed to be very self-serving and very damaging to our country.
That's the question I pondered about Thatcher. Did he really think his policies would save the country? In Thatcher's case, she really did believe it. She actually did believe that this cutting in a recession, which is basically, you know, it's like a family. If you're not earning enough, you cut, right? Well, that's true for a family, but for a country, that is not true. You have to spend, boost the economy. So, and that's the essential message of Keynes. But it's counterintuitive. So the average guy thinks, oh, well, Cruz is right. We have to cut. And all these scroungers, you know, they're living the high life of my hard work, you know. But what, you know, this is candidly what you see in England is this terrible class divide. And if you actually do watch this play on TV, which I recommend, because it's the famous 1930s Jarrow March is shown up, where Jarrow is in the north of England, and so the miners marched 200 or 300 miles to London to protest against the cuts and the deprivation in the depth of depression. So they got to London and they were totally ignored. They were told, go home. And so actually the guy that wrote it actually came from Jarrow. So that memory is seared into the British working people. And they've never forgotten it. Now, it's amazing to me that Americans could go through the Depression and totally forget about it. I mean, as if it didn't happen. You know, and then, you know, so that the Republicans can come into office, and anyone that had any idea of, you know, social benefits was branded as a socialist, communist, or worse. In fact, in England, when the Archbishop of Canterbury came out with his report, on child poverty, he was branded as a Marxist. So, you know, that's to me it's a matter of moral values. Which side of the side are you on? Do you care about people or what? If you don't, then, you know, as I say, I thank God that the Labour Party did come in after the war, because, you know, it's without, I mean, my dad, after the war, an uncle was killed, 2 other uncles were wounded, my dad was wounded, his hearing was wrecked. I mean, we lived in one room for a year after the war. It was terrible, terrible. You have no idea, really, how it was. Anyway, now, if you don't care about people, you say, oh, well, they're just feckless, they're useless and they're idlers and so on. Well, that is not the way, you know, you're going to have a happy, successful, growing, prosperous country. It isn't. So as I say, I think Cruz should be attacked on moral values, because I don't think he has any, apart from completely crazy economic views. You know, and I'll challenge anybody here to challenge that view.
Well, sometimes I give facts to people, facts, and they answer me as, that's your opinion. And I'm like, no, that's a fact. It's in the books. It's a fact. So it's hard to challenge morality or facts when all you get is somebody that answers you and says, calls it an opinion.
Yeah, the problem is, people believe that going to church on a Sunday and actually probably praying for forgiveness is, you know, is moral values. Well, you know, sorry, I don't buy that. In fact, of late I've been using, because I generally stay away from, I talk about politics and economics, but usually I don't talk about religion and so on. But I really do think it comes back down to morality. You know, I've been talking about that to people a lot lately. And when I talk about it in those terms, they're amazed. You know, what? You know, moral values, what is it, you know? But I think in life, integrity and moral values, really, that's what it comes down to. I mean, you know, yes?
In reality, I got a question. Why? It's always been like this, but why our government pay more taxes the low and medium society than the rich people? I never get that part.
Because the rich are always in power. I mean,
but isn't it that rich people should pay more taxes than us because we are working more than them?
No, actually, if you want a, you know, a society, you must pay taxes. Now the question is, what is the fair share for people? I mean, what should the poor people pay, and what should the middle class pay, and what should the rich pay? Well, as I think, I believe it was you, George, who produced charts showing that the taxation rate has been reduced from I think about 80% in America in the 50s, way down to what, 35, 40%. So, and certainly, you know, so the rich have more pulling power, really, in both political parties, and so they get the tax rates reduced. And so the poorest have to pick up the slack. Now, as I say, in England, over this community charge, in the end, people wouldn't stand for it. They just wouldn't stand for it. So they revolted, and there were riots and police charges and everything else went on. I mean, it was mayhem in the streets. But yes, I mean, if you want a civilized society, now the other thing, of course, Now, my wife comes from Finland now. It turns out that the Finland, they pay taxes, but they get the most back from any country in the world. I think Americans are overtaxed. I think there's a lot of things. I'm not in favor of state-controlled enterprises per se, but I think the vital services are monopolies, probably best run by the state, and more efficiently and cheaply run, turns out. But as I've always said, my feeling is that this strife between the rich and the poor comes about because this economic divide, actually, and also this social divide. And if it goes too much and the fabric breaks, then you have a revolution. And I guess when I came in 1968, people said to me, God, you're going to America. Because there were riots in the streets and so on and so forth. But I don't regret coming, actually. I had a wonderful career at Xerox, and it was in fact, when we came, we thought it was wonderful, really. I mean, it was so cheap here, everybody was working. I mean, it was really marvelous. But we said to each other then, this is too good to last, and it was. And the reason I think Americans should really seriously ask is, why didn't it last? What's gone wrong?
Is there bigotry against people living in the industrial north regions? Like there is in this country against blacks?
There is, okay, when I grew up, there weren't very many minorities, but there was a heavy, as my wife said, you could actually cut the class distinction with a knife. I mean, it was that, because the upper class, as I said, are a class apart. They speak differently, they dress differently, they look different. I mean, and they act different. I mean, they are a upper class apart. Now, as I said, many of them are okay. I mean, I worked with a character called Stuart Redaway. His father was professor of economics in Cambridge. He was a very nice chap, but he was totally naive. I mean, he just, for example, he was in lodgings, and he wanted to use the phone, and the landlady was on the phone, and he walks up to her and he says, "Oh, my good lady, do you mind if I use the phone?" And she said, the way he said it, offended her. He had no idea that he'd offended her. Because so, it was laughable in a way, but it shows the divide. So it's not bigotry as much as class distinction. Now, over here, of course, I will break into this. I was going to talk about this later, but last week we had Lyndon LaRouche gang, and apparently Lyndon LaRouche's first priority is to smash the British Empire today, because of the fact that he was in India and there were some riots, people were shot and so on, so he thought that was very bad. And it probably was bad. But anyway, so at a dinner party after the war, an American lady said to Winston Churchill, "Oh, what are you doing about these poor Indians?" And Winston said, "Madam, before we go any further, we must elucidate what Indians you're talking about. Are you talking about the British Indians that have prospered and increased under our rule, or are you talking about your red Indians that have been decimated?" So, anyway, But yes, so you know, when you have a non-prosperous company as a country, it's an unhappy place, really. And so when you have social strife and lowering living standards, then it's a very unhappy country, very unhappy. And that, to me, is the problem, really. I mean, everybody in this world deserves an equal chance, really. And those of us that are fortunate should try and help lift up the others. To me, that's moral values. So speaking for myself, I do try and help others a lot, as much as I can. But I think, it's your attitude to people, really. Really. So that's fundamentally it, in my judgment, anyway.
Now it's your turn to talk. So who wants to be first? Jim. You got 5 minutes.
You won't take that long. This is more scattershooting than anything else. But I couldn't help but noticing that scroungers is pretty close to takers in the 47% that's being used now. So that made a connection. And then when you mentioned noblesse oblige, you're not the first to mention this. I mean, de Tocqueville and Mencken both mentioned that the problem with the American aristocracy is that they have no moral sense. So, and then the very last thing, the question I asked you about why the religious leaders don't come down on them, it did occur to me, I heard one time that religion can be taken both two ways. It can be taken vertically, where all you do is worship and go to church on Sundays, or horizontally, which means that you reach out to your fellow man and do something. And so I guess the point that I would make is you got to do both. Those are my thoughts.
Here's the floor.
Thank you, John. That was a great talk. I believe there are terrorists in our country. We have Timothy McVeigh, which was a domestic terrorist that blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. And then we have Ted Cruz, an economic terrorist that's ready to tear our country apart and basically put us on a very bad state, which the whole world economy could have fallen because of him. And Ted Cruz, I didn't believe, I'm going to get a little religious now, in reincarnation. I never believed in reincarnation till I heard Ted Cruz. And he is definitely the reincarnation of Joe McCarthy. Those that are old enough will remember Joe McCarthy. I was 13 or 14 at the time, and I watched things being passed out, and everybody in the world was a communist. These innuendos. And I think to answer some of the questions, if a lie is told enough, the same lie, people start believing it. And I think this is what we got to be careful of. I myself like what Nancy Pelosi says. Some of them go to pray on Sunday, P-R-A-Y, and Monday through Friday, they pray on one another, P-R-E-Y. And I think that is so true. I had the opportunity to go to Grand Prairie and hear Mark Beesley, one of our congressmen, talk. He's at District 33. And what he took was the food stamp challenge. And he's trying to get more congressmen to do the same. he had to live on what they give a single person in, that needs it, and how much he had to live on. His meals were $1.35 a day, each meal. And he said you really had to stretch it out. So he says anybody that says these takers really like what they're doing don't know what it's really all about. So I think that we are on a critical road right now. I heard the term, which I like, Chino. You heard right now, Chino is Christian in name only. And I think this is where they will take the Bible, especially the Old Testament. Like Bachman said, those that do not work do not eat. Now that's not the Jesus that I heard that says, what you do to the lowest, you also do unto me. So these are the things we have to look at with these so-called religious people, because I'm with John. I don't care if you're an atheist, an agnostic, or even a Catholic. I am a recovering Catholic, by the way. So anyway, I think this the morality of our whole country is at stake. And I see these right-wingers, claim, I play in a ball team with a bunch of them. Jim knows that. Me and Jim and a couple of the rest that come here are probably the only ones that don't feel that way. But they're saying, do you want this entitlement society? And I tell them, I'm out here to play ball, but if you really want to get tough, I'll get right in your face anytime. So anyway, I think this is what we have to look at, where we are, and we got to get rid of some of these people. We have some good people. The gerrymandering for our Congress is going to be hard to break. We can break it. We're going to have to go out, and we're going to have the women. There's a war against women, and there's a war against the poor. And I believe what's going to happen with these people, they are going to, even at this midterm election, which no presidential election, they are going to get enough people mad to say, I'm going to get off my duff and go out and vote. Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Gotta be next. Come on up here. You got 5 minutes.
Less than that. In 2011, there was neurological research done in the UK which proved that people like Thatcher, like Cruz, like their disciples, and there was histological evidence for this. Their neurons were pretty messed up, and that they are biologically incapable of empathy. And this is the scientific basis for what John was speaking about. And this was real. It was proven 2 years ago. My opinion is it's genetic, and we need to proceed accordingly.
Okay, who's next? It's gotta be next. Ray.
If it's the sensitivity cancer, they can be revoked while they have to live on food stamps.
Before we get too badly off track, which we are already leaning, maybe let me see if I can keep us on track. My purpose here is to give the overall picture, not go into any kind of details with Margaret Thatcher and the years that she was Prime Minister, and to give the general flow of the history. But in the late 1970s, Great Britain was experiencing one of the worst declines in the modern era. That last year, as John said, it was the winter of our discontent. It was a bitterly cold winter, and times were really hard, and there was just no brightness whatsoever. What the unions at that time were so powerful that the government sometimes condescended to them. After all, if a union strike could paralyze the whole country, and there was that threat, then even the prime minister was obliged to keep favor with the unions. Back down. If that union boss calls that strike, maybe a cold strike in the winter, people are going to freeze to death, you pay attention to that union guy. The economy was so slow, so plodding, so anemic that Great Britain was called the old man of Europe. Perhaps the country was just dying a slow death, a shadow of its former glory. The Britain that had fended off a Nazi Germany and fought bravely in the streets and on the beaches as Churchill inspired them, the same Great Britain that had defeated the French at Waterloo and Trafalgar was now being likened unto an old man staggering through his last days. It says, we will show how she reversed the progressive trend. Was that the progressive trend? The old man of Europe? Well, in the U.S., we were not doing much better. Even President Carter, during the 70s, admitted the country was in a malaise, and it was his word. Charismatic, visionary leaders were needed. Leaders who could lead their countries out of the malaise of the past and into a brighter future with a robust economy, dynamic growth, low unemployment, and a genuine hope for the future. People were down. People were depressed. It was just dark. It was cold. It was bleak. We had Ronald Reagan, who brought us a stronger economy that lasted 2 solid decades. The Brits had Margaret Thatcher. She broke the strangling power of the unions that had brought Britain low. Was there upheaval? Absolutely there was. The unions didn't like it that they got broke up, and they demonstrated, and they let the whole country know. They marched. But as we know, you've got to break some eggs if you're going to make an omelet. What needed to be broken was those unions. No more, after Margaret Thatcher came and broke unions, would a one-man, a union boss, threaten a strike if he didn't get what he wanted, and then perhaps plunge the whole country into chaos. The 80s under Margaret Thatcher were a time of hope and renewal and energy. Look it up. It was. Remember, she was elected twice. Whatever excuse you'd like to come up with, the people elected her 2 more times, and she was not thrown out by the people. She probably would have been elected again, but it was her party. And I will agree the poll tax was a mistake, and that was sort of what broke it. The 80s were a time of renewal and energy. No more was Great Britain called the old man of Europe. Now, big government people who believe that we need to have total control of the country in some Washington or London, though, that they are the ones who need to run everything. They need to run the economy. They need to run the Federal Reserve, the money management. They need to run everything. Nameless, faceless bureaucrats who are trying to balance all aspects of an economy, which is absolutely impossible. Does anybody understand that? It was absolutely impossible. But big government people who love unions and believe that government is the answer to everything, they still hate Margaret Thatcher. But Great Britain has had a renaissance because of her. The vibrant renewal after the dismal 70s gave Britons the hope, the boost that they had so desperately wanting to see. They saw that their beloved country could be a great country again. They had a leader who believed in them, believed in Great Britain, and freed them from the shackles of a Union-controlled 70s. It was Margaret Thatcher who gave them a future and a hope. And it would not have happened without her.
Okay, who's next? Is there going to be a next? Am I going to be the last man standing? Oh, here it comes. Oh, of course.
Where to start? I think the thing that is most obvious in the world today is this thing I've tried to iterate numerous times, is this infection in human consciousness of greed and lust for power, creating the cartels, creating the corporatism that is running the world today. And I think all of the leaders, if you want to call them that we have in politics today, are put there by the money. Therefore, they're responsible to the money. And even though one party will slap you on the right cheek and the other party will slap you on the left cheek and make some people avidly left and avidly right and conservative and liberal and all of that, this is manipulation largely. What we need to realize is that our founding fathers were God-inspired men beyond what we have seen in anything in modern society that I can see. And that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution they left us with, if we would go back to them and follow them, created the most prosperous society in history until we started letting corporatism take over. And one of the worst things we ever did was go against the Constitution and allow a private bank, the Federal Reserve, to take over control of our money. Again, I'm going to iterate this again. It's not exact words of what he said, but Thomas Jefferson stated that if we ever let a private bank take over control of our money through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, they will take all of the property away from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land that we have founded. And that's exactly what you're seeing. It took the Federal Reserve and the Wall Street. This is all phony value puffing that you have on both Wall Street and this fiat money that they make. Nothing behind it. It took them 16 years to give us the Great Depression. Now, these manipulations of up and down in society are easy for a bank as powerful as the Federal Reserve to control. And that's not by mistake what is happening. All of these people like Margaret Thatcher and like the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas and all of them, they all owe their soul to the devil who paid for their admission into those positions. That's why we have to be a well-educated society and very active and watchdog those SOBs, because there's no other proper term for any of them up there. Maybe there are a few exceptions, but basically that's my viewpoint on that. Now, when it comes to those who abuse power, at both ends of the scale there are abusive people, and so it has to be watchdogged at both ends. When I was practicing law, I had a friend, another lawyer, who had a client. And this man used to make regular trips up to Arkansas and along the way, and he kept 6 women pregnant so that he could go every month and collect half of their Social Security checks. Now, this kind of guy needs to be about 6 feet down, in my opinion. And there are these also on that end of it. Now, I'm not to say that we should not take care of the people who need help. They need help, and we need to do that. I'll give you an example. We got 180 degrees the opposite news about Libya. I just went to the lecture of Jimmy and Joanne Moriarty, who were on the ground during that war, and by God, it's 180 degrees different from anything we got in the news. Gaddafi's people were told by him that no member of his family would own a private home until every one of you citizens do, and his father passed away without owning a private home, and he lived out in a tent. And everybody, when couples got married, they were given a check by the government of over $18,000 to start their lives out on. And when anybody needed medical treatment, anywhere in the world they had to go, airfare, all the expenses, and family members to go along with them. And education, it was the same, except not the family members. Anything and everything they wanted. Our government is controlled by the money. The CIA, according to the manuals of the Board of Directors of the Federal Reserve that I read one day, until they were taken away from this friend, state that the CIA is largely funded by the Federal Reserve System. Now, this is an absolute conflict of interest. Gaddafi was going to put in a banking system with a dinar, I think he called it, based on gold, and he was getting all of African nations to join him on that. That would have been the end of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And that would have been the end of those businesses, you want to call them that, those cartels going in and saying, like they did down in Guyana. Guyana was a very happy third world country. Nobody was hungry because you walk off the street and go out to the forest and pick fruit growing all over the country. They had a happy tourist trade. They were pleasant. The International Monetary Fund, I think it was, came along and, of course, I'm sure made the president's life a lot different. But they said, oh, you need to join the modern world and have bridges and power plants and all of this. And today, the debt on the interest on their debt exceeds their gross national product. And that's what this banking system has done all over the world. And that's the cause of a lot of the chaos. We need to wake up. We need to flush out that Federal Reserve. We need to go back to a constitutional currency as it's defined in the Constitution. It was done with great wisdom. And we need to get rid of the IRS, which is banned by the Constitution of the United States. It's only the collection agency for the debt service on the Federal Reserve. That's what we need to do. And yes, the morals have declined in this country. Yuri Bezmenov, and I'm sure most of you haven't gone to YouTube and watched that very important presentation, stated that the first thing they do when they go into a country to convert it to communism is tear down the moral fiber. And they were astounded that in this country, instead of taking the 15 to 20 years, it only took 10 years. Look at the movies you have today. These would have been banned 20 years ago even. Hollywood is just despicable, in my opinion. Much of entertainment is just despicably immoral. And yes, we need to wake up. These are the issues. They're not the issues of parties and left and right. They're the issues of humanity, and we all need to join together against this power in Washington and around the world.
Okay, who's next? Is there a next? Am I running out of next? No more? I guess I'm the last man standing. Well, what's that? Yeah, he gets. You will. I will. I'll say something. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to congratulate our speaker for doing a fine job, and I think he did a terrific job. There's a great correlation between what happened in England and what may happen here, the way it's going. That's as he demonstrated tonight, and that's the value of what he had to say tonight. I think that one of the things we have to watch, and it was brought up by another speaker here, Al, who said the money is what dictates what's going on. We got a Congress that we have the best Congress money can buy. That's one of our problems. And we have to change that. We have to get the money out of Congress. We have to get so the money is not directing both parties in Congress to do whatever they're doing. The end result is that the corporations are getting their way in every respect. If you notice, the World Trade Organization, others, when we have the over labor costs are cheaper all the time. There's no tariffs on corporations. There's no tariffs on the countries to speak of due to the World Trade Organization, and it's working to our detriment. Where our corporations have all left town and gone overseas in many respects, and this has to be addressed. So anyway, that's some of what we have to address. I'd like to return this to our speaker. He gets to give the last word, and he gets to comment on all these crazy comments.
Don't forget the fruitcake.
Well, yes, it's always good to air one's views, and so
there is a fruitcake here, so
oh.
nobody's talking.
There's several of us here.
Yeah, there's several of us here.
I don't want it. You'll have to cut it off. Oh, no.
Let old John finish.
Let it finish.
Yes, the problems of England, as I said, were both social and economic. Yes, Ray, you're correct. The unions probably did gain too much power. But ironically, Thatcher, who was for laissez-faire, also had too much power. She centralized power under her leadership, actually. She forbade local governments from control of spending and so on. I mean, she became more and more authoritarian as time went on. My thrust really is to really, as I say, my family, my grandfather fought in the First World War. My father, uncles fought in the Second. Basically, they fought against totalitarianism. So I don't think as Albert said, you must guard against, power. Or, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts and all power corrupts absolutely. And it can be from the left or the right. But when you have in England a determined attack on your livelihood, and as I said, 25% of manufacturing disappeared, that was a fundamental attack on livelihood. So naturally, the working people who were deeply suspicious of the right wing did react forcefully. Now, I've advocated, as you know, economic democracy. I believe that everybody should have ownership of their own livelihood and have a say in their working conditions and government and so on. And also, I believe the role of government is to set a stable foundation for the economic and finances of a country. And when you stabilize it, then I think that sets the platform for growth. But but what you see is the inability in this system to control the economy. You have this every 8 years over here, especially since the 80s, you've seen a recession, and they're getting deeper and longer. To me, that's not a sign of a stable and growing economy. And of course, what happens in America reverberates to other economies around the world. And government's responsibility is to create that stable platform and allow individuals to prosper. But as I said many times, what we need is not totalitarian authority. We need more businesses and more jobs. That's what we need in this country. And I've advocated, explained how you do it. But I don't believe in strong, overpowering unions. I do not believe in, I mean, basically, the other week, just a week ago, there was a Ravenscroft plant in Scotland refining oil. That was state-owned at one point. Now it's owned by one man who lives in Switzerland. He threatened unless the working people cut their salaries, their pensions, he was going to shut down the plant. He broke them. Now, that is overweening power. So that was 10%, the GDP of Scotland would vanish. Now, that's what she did, basically. She destroyed 25% of the manufacturing plant across England. I mean, that is not, Ray, a successful way of doing business. It just isn't. But that was a fact. Now, I don't regard that as an economic success. I really don't. But I think with this polarizing attitudes that you get, that really is the death of countries. You have to have compromise, but you must have people of goodwill who actually see the best in people and not the worst. I mean, when I was a manager, one of my fellow managers, Fred Krantz, used to say, we have to help people, even though, our employees, even though they don't know we're helping them. We have to make them successful. And that by putting the right guy in the right position. It's the same, really, for a country. Responsibility, really, of any government is to make the country successful. Make everybody in the country reach his or her potential. That's really the hallmark of a growing, successful economy. Now Finland was attacked by the Russians in the Winter War of 1938. After the war, they really heavily invested in their people, education. I mean, every Finnish baby gets a box of clothes and so on. And as I said, the people get a greater return from their taxation than any other country in the world, and they're very successful. I mean, if you get a chance to go to Finland, it's a beautiful country, very modern, you can't believe it. It's very nice. My country really never got going after the war. It was this underinvestment problem. And as I said, my beef against Thatcher really is, that money, North oil money, should have been spent reinvesting in the country and not squandered. That's my biggest beef. And I think for this country, I think I've explained my concerns and worries. I think they're fairly valid. This polarization seems to be getting worse, not better. And I think they should be called on it, really.
Well, just so you know, they kick us out of here at 9 o'clock because we have to be out here by 9. And we generally go down to Starbucks down at the corner there, so we'll carry on the conversation. And you're welcome to come down there. Well, anyway, one other thing I announced, the man that was sitting here, the older gentleman, is gone. He brought this cake tonight, just so you know. And it's expensive cake, and also it's my wife's birthday Monday, and it's your birthday.
How about your birthday?
Well, mine's passed.
Yeah, well,
Halloween, yeah, but anyway, she has a birthday Monday. When is your birthday? November? So my daughter gave me I get a ride at the Texas Speedway. Go around 160 miles an hour. I get to do that. So, if I live through that, it'll be nice. Cloud 9. So, anyway. So that's fun. I get to do that. Huh?
It has new tires.
Yeah. Anyway, they have a professional driver, I'm told, so we'll see what happens.
Oh, that sounds thrilling. Gondola ride. At 160
Anyway, I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job tonight, and we'll regroup down at the Starbucks, and you know, whatever, camaraderie. Thank you much.
This is William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like us, or follow us, and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call. So when visiting the Barbeck's restaurant, tell them you want your reservation to the next College of Complex class.